focus on state governments and its departments and overlook the role of local governments. So we'll address this today. Local governments can contribute towards the goals we discussed earlier, and Elliot highlighted that, and so did Louisiana earlier, with local planning, car parking policies, road design, traffic calming, speed limits and measures designed to provide pride in the roads, particularly for active and public transport users. They can also influence transport outcomes by the way new housing, community and commercial developments are designed. Lots and lots of measures, many of which are carried out or can be in partnership with the state government or other municipalities. Now, our next presentation will be by Adam Pulford. Now, he was the mayor for Marybeck Council before the elections, and he's been re-elected. So well done, Adam. And he tells me that he's not yet mayor. The mayoral elections will be next week. So maybe we weren't going to postpone that until we found that out. But I've introduced you now, Adam. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Roger. Hi everybody, thanks for having me here, and thanks Roger for the invitation. I'm here to share a little bit about just what we've been doing at Marybeck in the last little while, and I don't have a PowerPoint, but I might just put my laptop on the chair here. So I just also wanted to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Wanted to let people know, if you didn't already, that there's an elected group of traditional owners in Victoria called the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, and they will begin treaty negotiations with the state government next week on a big statewide treaty. So treaty recognises Aboriginal people are the experts on their own lives, and it's about creating systemic change. That means they have the power and the freedom to be able to make decisions on the issues that affect them. So it's massive. Huge credit to the Victorian government for embarking on this journey with traditional owners in this state, and to all of the mob who have been fighting for this for decades and are now leading the charge. It's nation-leading work, and I really encourage people to look up the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria and walk the journey to treaty with the mob. So as we just said, I was recently re-elected to Marybeck City Council. I was first elected in the end of 2020 in the weird COVID elections. I had the privilege of being mayor for the last year of my term, and I'm really excited for the coming term. I'm here to talk about some of the work we're doing, particularly on active transport at Marybeck. So for those of you who don't know, Marybeck is the local government immediately north of the city of Melbourne. I'm sure who doesn't know what Marybeck is?
Yeah, it used to be Moreland.
It used to be Moreland, that's right. So yeah, Brunswick, Coburg, Fawkner, Oak Park, Glenroy, Pascoe Vale, Hadfield, Gowan Bray. We cover a range of suburbs in that in a north section, and just south of Hume. So in my term as councillor, my passion for transport has really developed, and partly it's an intellectual journey because, as we've heard from other speakers today, transport is our third biggest emitting sector, and as a local council, you have a lot of opportunity to influence what happens in transport. You can't necessarily, you don't have a lot of power to change, coal-fired power stations. There's a role we can play in that, but it's not in our direct decision-making kind of area, whereas the shape of our streets and our roads is. So there's a huge opportunity for councils to influence reducing emissions through transport. The climate reality is that with warmer temperatures and more extreme weather events happening more frequently, we are going to need to change our streets anyway. We need to have them cooler, so more trees. We need to have them more walkable, and we need to have them built so they can handle those extreme weather events like massive inundation. If you have 1 in 100 year storm events happening when 1 in 10 years, you need your infrastructure to be able to handle that too. So there's a need for changing our streets for climate resilience, but also for me there's a huge opportunity there because the shape of our streets is a form of climate action, not just dealing with climate impacts, but actually mitigating further, helping to make climate change worse. And that is by encouraging mode shift, getting people out of their cars and into more sustainable ways of transport, whether it's walking, riding, or public transport, or scooting. So we know we need we need to act on it for climate reasons, but also everybody in this room knows all the other benefits that come from having more sustainable forms of transport. You have cleaner air, so it improves our community's health. You have more people interacting, you're not just shut in a box private vehicle, so increased social interaction can help build social connection and cohesion. So I'm not a big brain, I'm a big mouth, and I like to think I'm a big doer as well. But I know that we've heard from people who are the experts. They are leading the kind of policy and theoretical development, and I see my role as kind of getting involved and helping with the politics for making these changes that we have known for decades need to happen, actually happen and see change in our communities and our streets. Another big way we have an impact, which has been touched on particularly by our previous speaker, is land zoning and land use planning. But I'm going to talk mainly about the work we're doing on active transport. So there's three broad ways that we can help encourage more sustainable transport as a council. There's policy change, like changing speed limits or allowing shared micromobility schemes to operate in our area. There's behavioural change programs, and then there's actual infrastructure changes, and that's kind of the main game, I believe, and that's obviously the hardest, as we've heard. So on policy changes, I'll just speak briefly about this, and particularly on speed limits. This year we've reduced, after about 14 years of saying we would, we've reduced our speed limits on our local roads to 40 kilometres an hour. Part of the delay was that we require state government approval to get that done, but reducing speeds means that you have fewer car accidents because drivers have more time to react to what's happening on the road, and when car accidents do happen, they're less severe because you have less force behind the car, which means it's less fatal or less severe for the people who are involved in accidents, particularly if they're on bikes or pedestrians. The way we approach this change in our city, we rolled it out over a 6-month period with a massive communications campaign with our residents, and we started from the south of our city and we worked our way up to the north. Partly that was because we know that there's broader community support for changes to our roads in the southern part of our city, where we have probably more cyclists and people who get around with active transport or on public transport, but also because we had existing 40-kilometre speed zones in parts of that community anyway, so it was less of a change for those residents. So we built from the south up and made sure we were talking to people every step of the way. We've been monitoring that, whether the speed limit reduction has actually had an impact on reducing speeds. It has, although on some wider roads, for example, it hasn't. And so we're monitoring that now, and our team will look at what other, say, infrastructure changes we need to make later on, maybe narrowing roads so that there's, it's not like a big highway that cars can hoon around in. They feel like they need to go slower to be safer. Behaviour change, we have a number of programs. So there's a really great one that our local bicycle users group, the Marybeck Bug, and a massive shout out to that group. They are absolutely incredible and the reason that we are able to do some bold stuff in Marybeck, because they help give that community and political support. They run, up in Faulkner, they've been running programs with Muslim women about teaching them how to ride bikes, because they haven't ridden bikes before. A lot of those women don't have licenses, and so actually learning how to ride a bike is their ticket to freedom and autonomy, and that's had great results for the group of Muslim women who have done that program, and council now just regularly funds that through the bicycle users group. The big behavioural change program I wanted to talk about though was our Ride and Stride program, something that I'm really proud of the team for developing and leading on, and it's been acknowledged internationally for the work that they're doing here. What it sees is our council officers partnering with local primary schools, and we've set the goal of having 80% of trips to schools in our community be through sustainable forms of transport by 2030. So that includes public transport, walking, riding, scooting. So that's a big ambitious goal. We actually need to have interventions to get us there. the Ride and Stride program is the way that we do that. We tailor our Ride and Stride program to each primary school depending on what they want and what they need. But two of the features I wanted to mention were, one, we've given free e-bike hire to people involved in schools for a month, which means that they've tried that out, or we've given subsidised hire for a couple of months. And we have seen people actually, the best story I have is we have a principal who always drove to work. She did the e-bike free month trial. Since then, she's become a massive advocate for e-bikes and for active transportation. And when we had a political fight just this year about closing a road, so a modal filter, one of the low interventions you can do to make streets safer for riding and walking, we had one primary school lividly against it, but we had two other schools, including this school that the principal had participated in our 1 month free e-bike program. She was leading the charge for that change. And so it just shows how you can turn somebody into ambivalence or slight opposition to advocate. And then I'd really love to spend like 20 minutes talking about that one road closure because it's so interesting in terms of how the politics played out. But I thought we'd barely get a majority for that closure. We had 8 out of 11 councils, I think, voting for it in the end. And I attribute a lot of that to that work with that principal. And when you have one school telling us that it's going to be dangerous and awful, of course, as a decision maker, you're going to be wanting to be sympathetic to that group. But when you have evidence on your side, and then you have other voices saying, actually, we believe the evidence, we know in our experience that this is needed, you end up getting a political majority for closing a road and making streets safer. The other thing that we do is we do an open streets program where we actually close off streets near the road for a day. We encourage people to, it's a kind of big education comms campaign with parents. We've seen some great impacts from that. So from those programs, a third of families walk to school more, and 50% of families rode to school more. So it's amazing. And also, we're getting kids when they're young. So we're building passion for walking and riding when they're young. They're going to continue to advocate for that and want to take that practice through the rest of their lives. I don't know how much time I have left.
You've got one.
Oh, okay. Well, unfortunately, we'll miss a lot of the really good stuff that I wanted to talk about. But basically, infrastructure changes, I think, is where the main game is. It's really hard politically to get done. But the Dutch cycling professor, Marco de Rommelstrot, I don't know how to say the Dutch name, he was in Melbourne last year, and one of the things he told The Age was, when you're changing streets, start from where there's established communities that can actually be supportive of those changes, so that when you're a decision maker like I am, you're not just hearing from the people who are anti any change, because there's always people who are going to oppose any change. What you need is a counterbalance of voices calling for change. And so our officers have learned from that. And we've got these established communities in schools where we've been partnering with over many years through the Ride and Stride program. We now have these schools who are saying, I want my kids to ride and walk more, not just on the days that you close off the streets. We actually need to change these streets so that they're safer, so I can trust my kids can get to school safely walking or riding. And our transport team has now matched our infrastructure program with the Ride and Stride program. So we're actually starting around our schools, changing the infrastructure around there, because you've got people, like the road closure I mentioned, calling for that change because they know how impactful it would be for their kids, for their students. So that's probably my time. I might just say, the other thing we do is rather than, we previously used to have like say a budget for roundabouts, so we'd say we'd fix 5 roundabouts a year. Instead, the team has kind of pulled all of those tactic-based interventions into a road-changing kind of fund. And now when we look at a road, we actually zoom out a bit and say, rather than building a roundabout here or building a crossing here, how do we look at this street as its function amongst all the other streets around it? And then we apply the Healthy Streets framework that looks at experience of like shade, are there places to sit, are there places to walk, and actually go, of all these different things, this street we want it to be better for cycling, so we can make these changes, build a bike lane here. and that will improve that experience. But this street actually is our bus route, so we're not going to put a bike lane on that street. We're going to make it better for people catching public transport and making it easier for the bus to get through. So taking more of that network approach, and rather than looking at specific interventions like a crossing or a roundabout, trying to zoom out a bit more and say, how can we improve this street for everyone, not just cyclists or public transport users? And again, that's about getting more public support, because if you're not just putting in a bike lane, but you're putting in seats and trees, the people who walk around that area are like, oh, it's a lot cooler and nicer to walk around in. I can sit down and rest. And it's not just the cyclists that are benefiting, for example. So that's probably where I'll sum up there. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Adam. That was excellent. Now, the next part of the forum is an opportunity for everyone to contribute their ideas and suggestions. We've looked at